Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of whatever the hell this is. My name's Max, aka Local HJ, aka number one alien kisser. You can find me on Discord. You can find me on this channel. Without too much further ado, this episode of I don't know, the Sex Files. I don't know, whatever. So you tell me what this is called. Alien investigation, whatever. UFO update, whatever you want to call it. This episode, I actually did a lot of research. I worked a little bit harder. So this kind of upload, if I do more UFO or like research-based videos, you cannot expect it to be like a weekly upload. It would probably be a month or two or three between, because it took me a while to compile my list here. But the focus of today's video is about Roswell. Partially inspired because I just saw the Age of Disclosure movie. And Age of Disclosure, everybody in that movie pretty much talks about, all these, people like how put off, and, they're all speaking as if Roswell, as a matter of fact, it definitely happened. So I think it's worthy of more attention. If we're talking about, history, I think more people need to be aware of what Roswell was, who was really saying what, when, and why. So this video is actually going to be specifically focused on a witness list I've compiled. It's from a few different sources. My source list will be in the description, as well as other videos you can check out. I heavily recommend UAP Gerb's video about Philip J. Corso. And yeah, there's just a ton of information out there already about Roswell. It's one of the most well-documented cases. But this specifically is going to be about the witness list, both first, second, third-hand witness people who were involved in the case and what they had to say. So without too much further ado, the primary sources for this video will be roswellproof.com, which is a great resource for this kind of thing, and the book The Day After Roswell by Philip J. Corso. There's, we're going to get into the nitty gritty here, but I'm going to start with, let me go ahead and swap over. So this is the website we're going to be looking at. This is Roswell Proof. So this is a great resource if you're interested in learning more about Roswell. Specifically, I found it a great resource when compiling this list. So before we jump into here, though, let me scooch this over here. Let's take a look at The Day After Roswell as well, which is this book by Philip J. Corso. Let's take a look at the... So, Philip J. Corso is the author of The Day After Roswell and claims to have been given pieces of the Roswell crash to distribute to contractors for reverse engineering efforts, with the resulting patents sold back to the U.S. So, that's my little synopsis there. Let's take a look at the bio down here. So, he was a former U.S. intelligence officer, a National Security Council member, key figure in the Cold War military operations, and with decades of classified experience, he played a role in weapons research, technological development. And so, basically, in the course of this book, if you read it, he's basically claiming that he was given a box of technology from Roswell crash, and his job within the government was to disseminate this technology to different contractors, who would then reverse engineer this technology and give it back to the government in the form of contracts, or not just contracts, but patents and stuff. So even though he was not a first-hand witness to the crash, he did claim to see the bodies, and there's some other things. His full manuscript for this book is a little bit more in depth, and I also will include Gerb's video in the description, because it goes into way more depth about Philip J. Corso's life and his claims, and some of his other stuff that wasn't included in the book that's in the manuscript. So there is some interesting stuff. I don't know if I believe everything he said, but with regards to legacy programs and how they operate today, a lot of what Corso says in the book could be relevant to the discussion now about how they could have established some of these programs and hid them using national security as a shield. So definitely worth a read if you haven't read it. Now we're gonna go over here back to the Roswell Proof site. One of the major ones is a little bit funny, not to put a pun on it, Major Jesse Marcel. So I think this is probably one of the most prominent quote unquote first-hand witnesses. Marcel is he's one of the infamous people in the picture holding the debris from Roswell, if you've ever seen it, where he's kneeling over supposed debris from the crash, but that ended up being like pieces of a weather balloon as part of a cover-up. And so, Marcel, let's take a look at the synopsis I have here. So he was then the intelligence chief over at Roswell and the first to investigate the sheep rancher of Mac Brazel findings, which is Marcel then confirmed in a number of interviews 30 years later that the crash debris had highly anomalous properties that were not of this earth. Marcel also spoke of Ramey's weather balloon cover-up at Fort Worth. So there's a lot of information on this website about Marcel and his claims. You know, he claimed to have taken pieces of the crash home and shown his family. And so also included in the witness list is his son, Marcel Jr., who claims to have seen the pieces brought to the house after the crash. So, Marcel, I would say, is probably one of the most important witnesses. I have like movies. Let me see if I've got it right here. Here we go. Check it out. Because I collect VHS. So this movie, Roswell, starring the guy from Twin Peaks, Kyle MacLachlan, and Martin Sheen. This is actually a good movie, and it covers the entire, basically... I don't know why I needed to show you that. But if you wanted to get an idea of his life without reading a wiki page, you could always watch. It's a made-for-TV movie, but it's really good, and it covers all of his claims. It shows him as an old man, basically at the beginning, and dealing with some of the ridicule from his claims. You know what I mean? I think a part of this is that, you know, a lot of people accuse Marcel of being, you know, and I think that's a caveat you should put in with all of these witnesses is... we don't know. These are just claims, right? I'm just telling you what has been reported about what they have seen. But there's just that's the whole point of compiling this list, is that there's just so many people. These are just the most prominent ones. And of course, when you are the most prominent witnesses, people are going to call into question and try to poke holes in your story. But yeah, I do think that it's a story worth hearing. And Marcel's story is probably the most... like, if you wanted to just very surface level get into Roswell, this is, you know, where a lot of people start. So definitely check out Marcel's story, his statements, and more about him. So speaking about Mac Brazel, there's one of the number one, let's see here, witnesses is Billy Brazel Jr., who is Mac Brazel's adult son. And he's one of the ones who supposedly handled the debris. Mac was the one who owned the ranch that supposedly parts of this crash occurred. I don't know the exact details of the crash. You know, that part is murky, but some people claim there's multiple crash sites, that it was actually two pieces of a UFO that snapped in half. It's hard to say. There's lots of different stories about this. But one of the debris fields was on Mac Brazel's, and this is where Jesse Marcel would find the debris that he would collect and bring to, you know, his home and to the station and show people, and that would eventually be covered up. So Billy Brazel, William Brazel Jr., his claims, you know, he says here there were some wooden-like particles like balsa wood, but a bit darker and colder. It was pliable but wouldn't break. They weighed nothing but couldn't scratch it with your fingernail, and just seen a few bits. So real light, neutral color, more of a tan to the memory. Couldn't break it. I couldn't whittle it with my pocket knife. So we're talking about a strange metal polymer, lightweight. This was before machining metal was really common. Working with metal in the 40s was different. So this is I think significant. This is one of the more significant. Billy Brazel, Mac Brazel, you know, they claim to have had hands on with this exotic material. All right, moving on. Let's see here. We got Louis Bill Rickett. So Louis Rickett was one of the regular Army CIC agents in Marcel's office. Rickett confirmed the anomalous quality of the debris, a major cleanup operation on Brazel's ranch, high secrecy, and being involved in a subsequent investigation to determine the trajectory of the crash. He was also told by others about the shape of the main craft. Like Chester Barton, he claimed to have placed the main impact site at 45 minutes north of Roswell via a car. So... let's see. There was a slight piece curved of metal, real light. It was 6 inches by 12 or 14, very light. I crouched down and tried to snap it. My boss, Capt, laughed and said, "Smart guy, he's trying to do what we couldn't do." And I asked, "What the heck is this stuff made out of? It doesn't feel like plastic, and I never seen a piece of metal this thin that you couldn't break." So, That's Bill Rickett talking about handling the debris. All right, so there's a ton of people, so I'm going to move on. There's a ton of information here. All of these people, there's obviously stuff I'm skipping over here. If you want to look up, all of these links are on the Roswell Proof site, or stuff with the Corsos in his book. So if you want to learn more about what they're saying, I'm just touching on how many people were here and how many of them seem to not just have maybe second or third hand, but some of these people actually held this stuff in their hands, this exotic material that in the 40s was unheard of. So, okay, so let's move on. That's Louis Rickett. The next one would be Brigadier General Arthur Exon. So let's give you a quick rundown. Though not a direct participant, here we go, a second hand, Exon was stationed at Wright Field, overflew the area afterwards, and was later commanding officer of Wright-Patterson Air Force. Exon, with the first interviewed, flatly said Roswell was a recovery of a craft from space. Among other things, he confirmed the existence of 2 crash sites. See, there you go. Exon also said he heard the bodies were recovered and confirmed the debris was highly anomalous based on testing done by the labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Exon added that he was aware of other crash recoveries that occurred while he was a commanding officer at Wright-Pat. So, and there's more. This whole page is his testimony here, talking about his time on the base. So yeah, again, he was not. He did not have hands-on with this. He was not at the crash, but he was commanding officer at Wright-Pat when some of this material supposedly came through, and he straight up said, yeah, it was a cover-up, right? So, and then again, this is a brigadier general. These are higher-ups at the time. These are not just, guys, privates off the street. Some of them are, but, that's the range of witnesses we're working with here are police officers, people in the Army, in the Air Force, at different fields across the U.S. and within the government. So, Brigadier General, all right, we're going to move on to the next one. Chester Riddle, a nuclear engineer who built the first A-bomb implosion detonator, revealed being told by the Roswell base commander William Blanchard, who was his personal friend, that the Roswell was an alien spacecraft and that 4 bodies had been recovered. All of them were eventually taken to the Wright-Patterson for study in a highly secure facility. He personally knew that general, and he also learned from other sources who had seen the bodies the results of the autopsies. Major General Kenner Hertford, head of the Army's Atomic Energy Department, who Little said had a UFO sighting with him when he was at Kirtland Air Force Base, was also convinced Roswell was extraterrestrial and the bodies were recovered. All right, so Chester Little. That's another one, a nuclear engineer. So even back in the 40s, these guys were UFOs and nukes, man. I'm telling you, it's a song as old as time, right? So, all right, let's move on. Steve Lovekin, here, I'll give you my quick rundown here. All right, who served in the White House Army Signal Corps during Eisenhower and the Kennedy administrations from 1959 to 1961. Although he's like Exxon and not a direct participant, Lovekin said he received a 1959 Pentagon briefing showing a metallic beam with symbols from a 1947 New Mexico crash, presumably Roswell, plus being told about either 3 to 5 alien bodies being recovered, one who was initially alive. He also said he was shown very compelling photographic and radar evidence of UFOs. He also testified of threats against military personnel who had been given this information if they were to publicly reveal it. Finally, he told of Eisenhower's concern over losing control of the situation with the power falling in the hands of private corporations given access to the materials. So, legacy program stuff here. Lovekin is a disclosure project witness. Okay, so Steve Lovekin, again, a secondhand witness, but was basically briefed on these things, and says he was shown either pictures or was shown actual pieces of the craft. All right, moving on to the next one, we have, what is this? General Thomas Dubois and the weather balloon cover-up. So, General Ramey's chief of staff, who in 1947, Dubois was handling the high-level phone communications between Roswell, Fort Worth, and Washington at the time. Dubois went on, I'm sorry, I keep calling him Dubois, but I think it's Dubois, sorry. Dubois went on record many times about the high secrecy involved, including the matter going directly to the White House. Receiving direct orders from Washington to instigate a cover-up, General Ramey's weather balloon cover-up story, and a highly secret shipment of debris from Roswell to Fort Worth, Washington, and Wright-Patterson Field. Dubois, I don't know why his name's getting me. Damning testimony made him a complete non-entity in the Air Force's 1995 Roswell report, which didn't even bother to identify him in photos taken of General Ramey with the balloon. So there's more of this. He has a sworn affidavit in his testimony about this supposed cover-up and that he was directed to do it. So again, we're talking about a wide range of people coming forward throughout the years to add to this story, right? And not all these people were selling books. Not all these people were, giving a ton of interviews. This guy filled out an affidavit, and I'm pretty sure that was it. He did. There's a recorded interview over here, and that's the thing. I will include some video. I know I have a video interview with Billy Brazel Jr. So there's all sorts of actual videos of these people who claim to have been in these situations. So, all right, let's move to the next page. This one, okay, so this one is actually a multiple witnesses here. So this is the B-29 crate flight. All right, so this is actually 3 witnesses in one. So we're going to go Sergeant Robert Slusher, PFC Ernest Lloyd Thompson, and Staff Sergeant Arthur Ospachuk. These are crew members of a mysterious B-29 flight from Roswell to Fort Worth on July 9th, 1947, transporting a large wooden crate in the Bombay, surrounded by armed guard of officers. Thompson also recognized a Roswell-based doctor disguised as a security officer being on board. Upon arrival, the plane was met by high brass and a mortician. Afterward, another crew member, Felix Martucci, who knew the mortician, said that he had made history, adding this confirmed base rumors of a crashed craft and crew that had been hearing about. This is probably the flight referred to in the Ramey memo that could ship whatever was in the disk, the cadavers, quote-unquote, to Fort Worth by B-29 to be prepped by a mortician team. Click on the link. I'm literally reading the blurb from the website because there's a ton of testimony underneath it. New witnesses to the flight, including a daughter of the head of security saying the alien bodies were inside the crate. That's what I mean, is a lot of these stories have their own supplemental witnesses that add on. So it's not just this list of like 30 or 40 people. There's supplemental witnesses within each of these stories. And some of these stories back each other up. Here we go, right here. Blanche Wani, the daughter of the top-level officer Meyer Washney, identifying her father as one of the securities. She told researchers that he had flown in from Fort Collins. Yeah, a large single crate in the Bombay. That's what I'm saying is all of this stuff is backed up by not just first-hand witness testimony, but also other people, like the family members of these people. So it's not always just the person coming forward like on their deathbed. It's also their family members corroborating some of these stories. So that's 3 witnesses plus the daughter on that one. So let's move on to the next one here. All right, so this one is Frank Kaufman, and I have this pulled up here because it's related to what we're talking about, this map here. So these are different crash sites that were presumed to be where this, the X's mark where it could have been, right? So, a highly controversial witness claiming to be one of the exclusive members of a special CIC team, which is an Army counterintelligence corps, in charge of the Roswell recovery op. Nonetheless, some of Kaufman's claims seem to be corroborated by the Ramey message, including the existence of a team such as this, the recovery of the impact disc with bodies found about 35 miles north of Roswell, and this special team being responsible for the initial Roswell base press release. Kaufman also testified to the knowing of a wooden crate guarded in a hangar with the bodies packed inside awaiting shipment, perhaps the same crate independently described by Slusher, Thompson, Ospachuk, which is the 3 from the previous story. However, in light of the Ramey memo, this places the finding of the victims in the disc on around July 8th, and Kaufman's statements about a July 5th recovery date for the crash is almost undoubtedly false. So there's a lot of contest about when this crash happened and how the timeline of things. So that's one thing, even in the book Day After Roswell, it's not really clear when exactly this crash occurred and when the recovery, you know what I mean? The timeline's a little murky. All right, so let's move on to the next one. All right, let me make sure. Okay, so Glenn Dennis. Glenn Dennis was a Roswell mortician and another highly controversial witness. Dennis spoke of receiving strange calls from the base about preservation techniques and child-sized coffins. Dennis also claimed to be at the Roswell Base Hospital, seeing unusual debris in the back of an ambulance, including a pod-like object, and being threatened. He also claimed to know a Roswell nurse who assisted in a preliminary autopsy at the base and described the aliens to him. So the nurse subsequently disappeared. However, attempts to identify the nurse have proven to be a complete failure, and he did not provide a real name. However, after some corroborative evidence immediately following Dennis's, such as David Wagner, a medical technician who remembered the nurse fitting his description as Pete Anaya, as did Pete Anaya, another person. So that's 3 people who say this nurse was real. Roswell Police Chief L.M. Hall stated that Dennis was telling him of calls from the base after about small coffins for the aliens only a few days after the crash saucer, including Staff Sergeant Milton Sprouse. That's a tough name to say. Also said he heard of the coffin call from Dennis, and a medic friend of him as well told him of alien bodies and an autopsy at the hospital. The medic and doctors and nurses involved in the autopsy all immediately were transferred, and their fate remained unknown. Multiple other witnesses testified to knowing of a call from the base for small child-sized casket. In addition, other independent witnesses have provided first and second-hand witness testimony about small bodies being found, including Walter Haut, Frederick Bernthal, Eli Benjamin, and relatives of Pappy Henderson. Speaking of which, Pappy Henderson. Here we go. Captain Oliver Pappy Henderson, senior pilot at Roswell Base in 1947 with a top secret clearance. There's no question that Henderson stated to a number of people before his death that he had flown flying saucer. Not the actual, but he was the one flying the crash to Wright-Patterson Field. So let's read. So Henderson was one of the senior pilots at Roswell. When the first public stories of Roswell crash began in 1981, Henderson confided to his family and friends that he was the pilot who flew the bodies of the aliens and the crash wreckage to Wright-Patterson Field. He also claimed to have seen the craft and bodies and provided a description. So this is another significant one. Again, the range of people who have, and this, he did not initially come out to the public with this. He went to his friends and family when this story kind of broke in the 80s, which is an important factor to establish for the timeline. Roswell was not an overnight thing. It kind of started brewing in the 70s and 80s, but the cover-up was effective, I think, for a while. Like, you know what I mean? So yeah, Oliver Pappy Henderson. This one is, he himself said some of this stuff, but most of this was coming from his family members, Henderson's wife, his daughter, and his business partner. So this, and he had, there's an affidavit by Robert Smith, and as well his account of the alien bodies are often contrasted with Glenn Dennis's, and they are very similar. So, which is weird because they are not connected. You know what I mean? So, anyway. That's Pappy Henderson, another really good and a witness because he's claimed to have flown them and seen them. So, all right. Going on to Sergeant Robert Smith, a member of the air transport unit at Roswell. Smith said he helped load crates filled with debris for transport by the C-54s, including one flown by Henderson and his crew. Smith was also among the witnesses who described the mysterious memory foil, memory metal, nitinol, chat, which he said was in the crates. He further described strangers to the base dressed in plain clothes and flashing ID cards for some unknown project, perhaps part of the special CIC team mentioned in the Ramey memo and by Frank Kaufman. Finally, he claimed that a distant cousin of his was the Secret Service, and that's where at the base representing President Truman. The same name was also provided by Kaufman. Another Secret Service agent named as being there has been confirmed to be one of President Truman's agents. So, basically, Robert Smith said he saw some of the exotic tech, the memory metal, which comes up all the time, this memory foil that no matter when you crumpled it up or changed it, it would always return to its shape, which is compared to the modern-day equivalent memory metals that we actually have now. So there's claims that the memory metal nitinol, or it has many different names, it's not just memory metal, but nitinol is one of the alloys that can be superheated to always retain its shape, and it can be malformed, and then it's now used for wheels on lunar rovers and Mars rovers, so the wheels that can never break or be punctured. It's made of memory metals. So that is one of the, similar to the Corso claims, because Corso claims that things like lasers, microchip wafers, night vision goggles, like all these things were coming from the Roswell crash as part of the reverse engineering efforts, and the memory metal is part of that. So Robert Smith, another person to have seemed to have either seen or held the memory metal from the crash. Moving on, we have Lieutenant Walter Haut, a former Roswell base information officer who issued the press release. In 2007, his book Witness to Roswell, Haut's deathbed sealed affidavit was published. In it, he confesses to seeing the bodies and the spacecraft in the hangar at Hangar 84P-3 and tells us the mysterious press release was General Ramey's idea to divert press and public away from the closer and more important craft body site. All right, so another first-hand witness, and just to the cover-up itself, because he was told to make the fake press release. And on his deathbed, he claimed to seeing the bodies and being part of the cover-up. All right, so let's go here. Frederick Bernthal, Army photographer flown in from Washington, D.C. He said he photographed the alien bodies in a tent. Remember, this is somebody who's not even in Roswell. He said he's being flown from D.C. to take pictures. Sorry, let me get a sip. A lot of talking. But yeah, so he said he photographed the alien bodies in a tent at the crash site and saw large quantities of crash debris being hauled away in trucks. A Roswell MP named Ed Sane independently corroborated his story, saying he guarded the tent with bodies which deadly force authorized to keep people out. So, Frederick Bernthal is making these claims, and this secondary witness, Roswell military police, Ed Sane. See, this is what I'm talking about. A lot of these stories are backed up by other witnesses. So some of these, you know what I mean? You might have just one page that says Marcel or Billy Brazel or like this guy Bernthal, and then inside it, there's another witness or two or three or five. So each one of these spills out into, you have this sprawling web of like, my list is maybe like 30, 40 people, but in the end, it's like 100 to 200 people who all have anecdotal stories of like, yes, my family saw that. Yes, my dad saw this. I was a little girl. I saw that. So that's what I mean. The breadth of witnesses. And we're going to do a lightning round at the end where I kind of speed through some of this because there's too many to go through. I don't know how long this video is anyway. All right, moving on to the next one. All right, Elias Benjamin, PFC, Roswell Military Police, said he escorted the bodies from the heavily guarded base Hangar P3 to the base hospital and saw a live one being worked on by doctors. He was threatened afterwards if he didn't keep quiet. So, yeah. He's in the book that we just talked about, Witness to Roswell, by Tom Carey and Don Schmitt. It looks like there is a video of this on YouTube. That's what I mean. That's why it's worth looking at these individual. See, here's a picture of Elias Benjamin. It's always worth looking at these individual articles because there's a lot of secondary information here, exactly where they were stationed and their roles in this. So on the base and why they were where they were to see the things that they saw. All right, moving along. Another one, Chester Barton, first lieutenant. All right, a World War II crash recovery expert and a crypto specialist. He was assigned to a military police unit. Barton said he was ordered to the crash site 45 minutes north of town and to check on the cleanup. Saw a football-sized field burn impact area guarded by MPs with scattered metal debris. Was told there was radiation. Radiation. I think that's the first mention of that. Heard archaeologists had first discovered it. And also heard bodies were being taken to the base hospital and then to Fort Worth. Because of what he saw, he knew the balloon explanation was ridiculous and it was always a cover-up. However, Barton was unusual in being a flying saucer crash skeptic, instead thinking it was maybe a B-29 that crashed in a nuclear accident. So he seemed to think, even though he saw the debris field with his own eyes, he thought it was a crashed B-29 bomber with a nuke on it, which I think would probably be way more disastrous. Who knows? I don't know. I think if a nuke went off, I don't know. It's just, even back then, when there was these guys who were first-hand witnesses, they were already coming up with their own alternate conspiracy theories to cover for it. So, but that's Chester Barton, who was a crash recovery specialist for World War II for like enemy craft. So, all right, let's go on to Earl Zimmerman. Formerly with AFSOI, which is the counterintelligence for the Air Force, while in the officers' club, he heard many rumors about a flying saucer crash and of it being investigated under the guise of an airplane crash. Several times he observed General Ramey and Charles Lindbergh being at the base unannounced in connection with this. Like Robert Smith spoke of seeing an unknown CIC man being at the base. Colonel Blanchard told him it was okay. He later worked with astronomer Dr. Lincoln LaPaz and corroborated the story of Roswell CIC man Louis Rickett, and that LaPaz investigated Roswell afterwards with the help of the CIC to try to determine the object's trajectory. Again, an airplane crash was then the cover story. So they had multiple cover stories at this point. All right, and it looks like I was supposed to have a page pulled up here. I'm just going to quickly read Earl Fulford in the engineering squadron. So he's a Staff Sergeant Earl Fulford. Fulford said he participated in the debris field cleanup, handled the memory foil, handled it, and said that the tarped crashed object on a flatbed truck was then towed to the Hangar 84 in the middle of the night. It was made to load a large wooden crate into an idling C-54. And then scooting down here, we have Robert Shirkey. Lieutenant Robert Shirkey was then the assistant operation officer. Shirkey also witnessed the loading of the B-29 that took Marcel to Fort Worth to see Ramey. He said he saw boxes of debris being carried on board, including the I-beam with the raised markings and a large piece of metal, brushed stainless steel, and obviously not part of any tinfoil radar target. He said he was told it was from a flying saucer. Along with witness Robert Porter, he also stated that the plane's pilot was Deputy Commanding Officer Lieutenant Colonel Payne Jennings, who is now the acting colonel with Colonel Blanchard, who is officially on leave. 9 days later, Shirkey was abruptly transferred to the Philippines for a post he didn't exist. Weird. All right, and then we're going to kind of go, I don't have a page pulled up for this. I believe this was a separate source. All of my sources will be listed in the description. There was multiple lists I pulled from, not just Roswell Proof, but this one is for a man named Dan Dwyer. In 1947, Frankie Dwyer Rowe, a 12-year-old girl, witnessed her father being threatened and warned by the military authorities for what he saw at the Roswell crash site. Her father was now deceased, was a crew chief for the Roswell Fire Department at the time. When the call came in the fire station, there had been an airship crash north of town. Dan Dwyer and Lee Reeves were dispatched with the station's tanker, a pickup truck with a large cylindrical water tank, to the crash site. The Chavez County Sheriff and a couple of his deputies were also following up in rear pursuit. Arriving just before the military could secure it, Dwyer and Reeves witnessed something totally unexpected. It wasn't an airplane at all, but an egg-shaped vessel of some sort they did not recognize, and bodies. Dwyer could then see 3 small human beings lying around in lee of the craft. With his focus riveted on the craft and the bodies on the ground, Dwyer noticed a movement in the corner of his eye. There, walking in front of him, out of nowhere, was something right out of a sci-fi novel. According to the fireman, it was the size of a 10-year-old child with gray skin, no hair, and large head and eyes. With moments, the roar of approaching vehicles could be heard as the military finally took charge. The 2 firemen were escorted away from the area and warned of the consequences if they ever were to speak of the incident. To further demonstrate the seriousness of what they witnessed, Dwyer and his family were paid a visit by the military police that very evening at their home. Okay? Sorry, I don't have a thing pulled up, but that's Dan Dwyer's testimony. He said he was threatened, and they said they would kill their children, which is fucked up. All right, and then Sheriff George Wilcox. A Roswell incident left an impact on all of them involved, including then Roswell Chief George Wilcox. Before his widow passed, Inez, she related a story to their granddaughter Barbara, who had then passed on the story. The event shocked George. He said he never wanted to be a sheriff again after that. His grandmother said, "Don't tell anybody." When the incident happened, the military police came to the house and told George that if I were ever to be told anything about the incident, not only would we be killed, but our whole family would be killed. They called my grandfather and said someone came and told him about the crash. He went out to their site. There was a big burned area. He saw the debris. There were 4 beings. Their heads were large. They wore suits of silk. One of them little men was alive. Inez Wilcox reiterated to Barbara and her George that took the threats very seriously and kept the information from the family. So that's George Wilcox, who was the sheriff of Roswell at the time. All right, next up, Sergeant Homer G. Rowlett. Homer G. Rowlett Jr. was a member of the 603rd Air Engineering Squad at the RAAF in 1947. He was a career military man and retired as an NCO after 26 years of service. Before passing in 1988 in March, he finally conveyed to his son Larry the following starting information: that he had involvement with the crash of the flying saucer. Rowlett was part of the cleanup detail sent to the crash site north of Roswell. Larry was told his father had seen everything. He handled the memory metal. Multiple people seem to have handled this memory metal. And when, according to Homer, was a thin foil that kept its shape. All right, and there's some testimony from Montoya, but it looks like it got a little corrupted here at the end of my notes. Somehow got cut off, but there was a guy who said he saw the 4 bodies as well, by the name of Montoya. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a speed run here. Let's go back here to the main page. I know there was some more at the bottom here that I did not include in my list, so let's briefly look at these. All right, here we go. Art McQuitty, former editor of the Roswell Morning Dispatch, said the base commander Blanchard admitted to authorizing the base press release and strange material being found. Judd Roberts, co-owner of the radio station KGFL, spoke of how the Wire recorded an interview with the rancher Mac Brazel for later airing, then withdrew it and received warnings from Washington about losing their license. William Woody, another witness to the military cordon thrown up north of town along the highway blocking access to the wet. He also has an affidavit. Lydia Sleepy, Albuquerque teletype operator and one of the earliest witnesses, stated that the story phoned in from the field by Roswell radio operator Johnny McBoyle. See more secondary witnesses. Seeing the crash saucer and hearing of bodies was intercepted and cut off on the telewire by the FBI. What the freak? All right, Loretta Proctor, neighbor of rancher Mac Brazel. Brazel told her and her husband of finding the material before going to Roswell, showing them the piece of wood-like object that couldn't be cut or burned. They advised him to go to the Roswell and report it. Brazel was detained at the base and complained bitterly of his treatment. Yep. Sally Strickland Tattolini, another neighbor of Brazel's, although only 9 years old at the time, remembered Mac Brazel's grown son, Billy Brazel, bringing over a piece of metallic-looking debris with memory properties to show her family. The incident was corroborated by her mother, described as tough, resembled a smooth fabric like silk or satin, and of course unfolded itself to the original shape after being crumpled up. Independently corroborated Billy Brazel's story of finding material, and also Marcel's of a metallic fabric with memory metals properties. Also, Dr. Marcel Jr., who was the 11-year-old son, like I said, of Jesse Marcel, who seemed to have seen this stuff, including the piece with the hieroglyphics. And we have Irving Newton, who is a weather officer at Fort Worth, who is skeptical of the weather balloon excuse. Oh, yeah, and I have another list on my phone. We're going to go through these real quick, because I got so many here, and some of them are probably redundant. I apologize if I have already talked about some of these, because I'm kind of reading off the site and off my notes here. All right, Captain Armstrong, who collected pieces of the Brazels 2 years after the crash. Barney Barnett Grady claimed to have found wreckage and bodies on plains of St. Augustine, about 120 miles from where Mac Brazel found his wreckage. Barrowclough, they're all backwards. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Barrowclough, executive officer at the field of Roswell. Colonel William Blanchard, who is the commander of the 509th Bomb Group, and upon seeing the material collected at the site by Marcel, he ordered the roads to be closed, and later made a special trip himself. Mac Brazel's on here, of course. Lieutenant Colonel Joe Briley, he became the operation officer at Roswell at the time. Dr. Jerry Brown, who is a NASA engineer who had worked at the White Sands Missile Range, he speculated the metal was from a uranium alloy or could be from a V-2 rocket. Sergeant Melvin Brown was at the second site guarding the truck containing the bodies. He guarded the hangar at the Roswell Army Field. Dennis Chavez, senator from New Mexico, supposedly called Walter Whitmore Sr. and suggested that he not air the interview. So, again, part of the government supposed cover-up threatened them that they might lose their license if they aired that Mac Brazel interview. Deputy B.A. Clark, who took the initial report from Mac Brazel at Chavez's sheriff office. Major Edwin D. Easel, who was the provost marshal in charge of the troops clearing the crash site. Wow, that was tough. Iris Foster, who owned a cafe in Taos, New Mexico. She often heard of a man named Cactus Jack, who was an amateur archaeologist, talk about seeing that downed ship. Once again, they said that archaeologists were the ones to find the crash, which is weird. Mary Ann Gardner, nurse at St. Petersburg Hospital, Florida, she heard an archaeologist on her deathbed tell about discovering alien ship and bodies. Again, an archaeologist story. Norma Gardner, a typist with top secret clearance at Wright Pat, she typed up the autopsy reports on the beings and saw 2 of the bodies herself. So that's a first-hand witness, Norma Gardner, who was a typer. Sappho Henderson, who was the wife of Pappy Henderson, who we talked about. Colonel Payne Jennings, deputy base and group commander at Roswell Airfield. He was the pilot of the B-29. Oh, yeah, I think I talked about him. Sorry. Bond Johnson, the staff reporter for the Telegram. He took photos of the wreckage in Ramey's office. The fake wreckage, probably. Frank Joyce, reporter and announcer for the KGFL. I might have talked about him. Yeah. Frank Kaufman, I talked about him. Dr. La Paz, expert in meteorites. Yeah, he was called to investigate the crash site. L.V. Vern Maltius said Barnett told him he'd seen the bodies in one-piece gray suits, after which the archaeologists and the military arrived. Marcel Jr., I talked about that. Johnny McBoyle, station manager at KWS. He tried to put the story over the wire. They blocked him. Phyllis McGuire, who's the daughter of Sheriff Wilcox. We talked about that. Art McQuitty, talked about that on this page right here. Warrant Officer Irving Newton, who is a weather officer. I think I just talked about him. Yep. Sorry, they have different titles sometimes, so I have them double listed. I tried to cross-reference my various lists. Jim Parker, which is a ranch hand on Mac Brazel's ranch, he said he came home from school one day and saw the Air Force truck in that area. Bud Payne, who was a neighbor who got thrown off of the ranch while he was chasing down a cow, because he said he saw where the crash site was. That's a neighbor of Mac Brazel. Sergeant Robert Porter, crewman of the B-29 that flew the packages from Roswell to Fort Worth. He claims that Marcel was on the flight. Floyd Proctor, Mac Brazel's nearest neighbor, husband of Loretta Proctor. We talked about it. Loretta Proctor comes up. Again, Timothy Proctor, who was the son, who also saw this. All the neighbors of Mac Brazel. You could tell this is a small town because all of the neighbors knew what was going on. And they're like, yeah, you mean the aliens that died on Mac Brazel's property? Let's keep going. Roger Ramey, we talked about that, who is the commander of the 509th Bomb Group. Louis Rickett, we talked about that, I believe. Judd Roberts, who is the minority owner of the KFGL. A lot of these people were, again, just this wide web of people who are all incidentally related, but they were all there at this time, knew of it, heard of it, were told to not talk about it. We talked about Lydia Sleepy. Robert Smith, we may have talked about it. Transport unit spent the day loading 3 aircraft from the material crash site. Lyman Strickland, another neighbor of Mac Brazel. He saw Brazel being escorted out of the office by 3 military officers. Strickland Marion, neighbor of Mac Brazel, wife of Lyman Strickland, upset Brazel visited them after his release from custody about his treatment. Robert Thomas, who was a warrant officer who came on a special flight to assist in recovery of the debris. Merle Tucker, owner of the several New Mexico radio stations, arrived from out of town to find his Roswell station had tried to put the crash story out and was blocked. Tommy Tyree, who is a ranch hand for Mac Brazel, he began to work about 1 month after the crash. Remembers the Brazels were irritated because the sheep would not cross the debris field and had to be driven the long way around to the water. So there was residual effects from the crash on the property for Mac Brazel. It affected their livestock. Walter Sr. of Whitmore, majority owner of KGFL, he said he hid Mac Brazel from the military. Dan Wilmot, president of Roswell, New Mexico, him and his family saw an oval-shaped object fly over their house on July 2nd, which is another supposed date of the crash. It moves around a lot. Sometimes it's July 4th. Sometimes it's before. Sometimes it's after. The cover up is definitely like in the aftermath of like the 4th. Let's see. And Vernon D. Zorn, non-commissioned officer in charge of the 3rd photo unit. He said no photos of the crash site were taken by his men. Okay, so that's pretty much my whole witness list. I'm sorry that's a lot of information to dump on you at once. Let's go back here. So yeah, that was it. That's basically all my research. There's a lot more information on this website. There's more witnesses I didn't include. There's probably people watching this video like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't include this. Feel free to put any research, any witnesses, anything like this, any books about this that you've read in the comments. I'm more than happy to do follow-up videos on Roswell. My goal with this UFO series, whatever it is to kind of deep dive into some of these claims, who's saying what, and I'm going to provide all the sources for this, the various, articles, lists, books, everything in the description, YouTube videos you can watch to find out more information on some of these people. But I don't know how many I just covered, and there's more. Obviously, every time I started reading a story, more names would come up. So in total, there's probably over 100 Roswell witnesses. Some of them more important than others. Some of them only incidentally knew of things. Some of them worked in government and were briefed on these things. So these are just people who I felt like were, add to that bigger picture of like, hey, you always hear people say, hey, this is too big of a story to keep secret. This is too much information. People would come forward, but then you actually dig into just one of the most famous cases of all time, Roswell, and look at how many freaking people are involved in this. It's not just a couple people. It's people from all walks of life, doctors, people in the military, people in the police, people in the fire department, people who were running the phones at the time, people who were like working in medical offices at the autopsies and all these different things. People flying the planes, cleaning up the wreckage. It would have been a huge effort, especially back in the 40s. And so this town is a small town. I'm sure all this stuff got covered up, and they were all just like, what? We all knew. So that's why I really wanted to talk about Roswell. I think it's an important case still to this day. I do want to make more videos like this. If you like this video, let me know. I'm thinking about making one on the Magenta crash from 1933. But Gerb's already got great videos on this. I'm just thinking like 10 to 20 minute videos. I don't know how long I've been doing this, by the way. But anyway, shorter videos, kind of succinct videos about these topics that we can all jump into and learn something, but hopefully you can share it to some friends and be like, oh, hey, by the way, did you know there was like over 40, 50, whatever, how many witnesses for Roswell? And it's you could throw them this and hopefully they'll take a look at it and be interested. But anyway, guys, that's my time. Thanks for watching. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.